Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming this evening. My name's Ali. I'm a member of Equity Union and an organizer with the Equity for a Green New Deal network, and I'll be guiding us through this exciting call. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notes. As Rona already mentioned, please keep yourself in mute unless you're speaking. You can use the chat to share your thoughts, links, or any questions throughout the call, and someone will hopefully attend to those through the chat. And this call, as you're probably aware, is being recorded just so that others can catch up later. Okay, so as you probably know, we're here tonight because a new wave of organising is taking shape. And faced with insecure work, rising rents, and a planet in crisis, more and more young people are joining unions, backing strikes, and demanding change. In fact, polling shows that Gen Z is more supportive of strikes than any other generation. And Workers' Planet is a new political education festival designed to connect that energy with our movements. It's a one-day fringe event running alongside the TUC Congress this September in Brighton. It's going to be packed, filled with panels, workshops, cultural activity, and a strategy for building a trade union movement that centres on climate justice and international solidarity. And tonight is the launch call, and it's about making sure your voices and your fights shape the future of our movement. So if you're feeling energized and want to get involved, we'll be dropping a Google form in the chat shortly, and you can sign up to volunteer at the event or contribute any skills, and whether that's graphic design, social media, or anything else, let us know in the form, or you can email us directly at aworkersplanet@gmail.com. I'm sure that'll go in the chat as well. And so we are joined tonight by some brilliant speakers. And to kick us off in this conversation, we will bring them into the conversation now. So each will bring a different lens to the challenges and opportunities that are facing young workers and climate activists today. First up, we have Keir Milburn. Keir will be speaking about the radicalization of young people, why creative joy is vital to movements, and why today's generation is more pro-union than ever. Take it away, Keir.
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, and thanks for asking me to contribute to this. I suppose it's a warm-up event for the Workers' Planet festival, I suppose we'll call it that, because it's like a really important initiative, but it's also a really great framing as Workers' Planet because it sort of joins together the two main crises we're living through. I'd make that argument. I mean, there's loads of crises, aren't there, at the minute? We're living through a time of like war, genocide, rising fascism, rollback of democratic rights. All of those could be called crises. But I'd argue, and like people do talk about all, they talk about poly crises or many crises, etc. I think that's probably a mistake. I think there are two crises, both of which are arising out of the very dynamics of capitalism itself. Two crises which are determining the other ones. I'd make that sort of argument, and they are sort of driving all of the other terrible events. The first crisis I'd talk about is you might think is fairly obvious. It's climate change, or what we should really say is like the ecological crises of our time, because climate change is just one of them, and there are others. There are other related crises, such as the great extinction of animal species, etc. And then the other crisis I'd say is what we might a rolling economic crisis. But I'd probably put it like this: we're living through a long period of economic stagnation, a really long period. Some people talk about a secular stagnation, and secular just means long term. A long term period of economic stagnation in which the sort of capitalist growth models that most countries around the world are following, they're basically broken in that they cannot provide the sort of rising living standards that ensures for the majority of people, a vast majority of people, that ensures some sort of social stability. That's the way you guarantee social and political stability, is by providing rising living standards. Capitalism, as it's currently formed, can no longer do this, and it's that and the way it compounds with the climate crisis and ecological crises, and climate crisis increasingly driving things such as inflation, for instance. It's that's driving all of the other political and social instability that we see, and we've been living through a period of incredible instability. I was asked to talk about generational aspects of these sorts of things, or of politics. And the thing about both of those crises, both this economic stagnation and the climate crisis, is that young people are getting the really shitty end of the stick of both of those. I mean, one of the, if we think about economic stagnation, one of the effects of economic stagnation, when the economy isn't growing, there are less and less places for people who have money and capital. There are less and less places for them to invest it in what we might call production, right? In factories or machinery, etc. There's hardly any investment in that in a country such as the UK. And when there's no opportunities for that money that's floating around, that has to be invested somewhere, and it's being invested in assets, in shares, in stocks, in buildings, in homes. And what we've seen is, over the last 30 years in particular, a massive increase, a massive inflation in asset prices. And it's got to the stage, in fact, where for most people, the increasing wealth coming from what you own, and for most people that's primarily your house, okay, but the income from what you own is going to have a play is probably going to play a larger part in determining your life outcomes than the income you generate from work, right? That's really quite a fundamental change, and it has all sorts of effects. And one of those effects is that young people, you arrive on the scene, house price is extremely expensive in most parts of the country, so expensive you likely cannot buy a home just from your income from work. You will need some sort of inheritance. That is an incredibly unfair, incredibly unjust situation. Climate change as well, you could see that as like affecting young people, or young people being more exposed to the ill effects of climate change, from the fact that hopefully young people are going to live longer than people of my age or older. Okay, that means that you're going to be suffering the ill effects of the carbon that's been put into the atmosphere by people of my age and older. Okay, that's once again incredibly unjust, incredibly unfair situation. And I'd make this argument as a result of those sorts of, we might call them material conditions, or material impacts of the sorts of structures we're living within. Um, you can see a sort of political divergence along age lines. And in particular, I want to talk about two really key attitudes which where you can see generational divergences. And when we say generational divergences, it doesn't mean everybody over the age of 55 believes this and everybody under the age of 55 believes that, but you can see a divergence, a general divergence among large groups, large amounts of data. The first attitude I want to point to is this, is that young people are much more likely than the over 50s to, and I'll read the statement upon which the polling was conducted. Young people are much more likely to think equality should be prioritised over economic growth, and that a person's position in society is due to outside factors rather than individual effort. Right now, that one, the last bit in particular, is really, really important, I think, because openness to structural explanations of social and personal phenomena, that is openness to left-wing explanations of how the world works. That we are structured and conditioned and limited by structural things such as capitalism, right? Such as imperialism, such as inequality, patriarchy, right? And that helps us understand this other polling, which Ali already mentioned, which is that younger people, and it was very surprising when I first saw this data, are much more pro-union, are much more pro-strike than older generations. So Gen Z, much more pro-union, then followed by millennials, etc. So you have this on one side, this openness to left arguments and openness, in theory, to collective action, right? That's one thing we can say, and that's being driven by these material conditions of these big, big crises. But there are other things about the way we live our lives and young people live our lives, which drive us in a different direction. Most significantly, we live more isolated lives, more individualized lives today than we did, say, 40 or 50 years ago. You can think about work, we no longer generally work in these big mass workplaces, which we think about as classic capitalism of the post-war period, etc. We might even just work from home. That's a very individualizing thing. We are much less likely to engage in collective forms of leisure, etc., collective social events, these sorts of things. And in fact, one of the outcomes of this is this huge epidemic of loneliness amongst young people, which is a really shocking thing. It used to be the affliction of older people. It used to tend to be afflict older people loneliness much more than younger people, etc. And that one brings me to this last point I want to make, which is, the really vital importance of moments of collectivity to fight against these isolating, individualizing forces about how we live our lives today. And I want to go more than just like collective events. I want to talk about the importance of building in moments of collective joy into our organizing, right? And I don't want to be wishy-washy and just say, oh, let's all be happy and clap our hands, etc. I want to be precise what I mean by joy. The 17th century philosopher Baruch Spinoza, he had this great definition of joy, very precise geometric definition of joy. He says, we feel joy when we experience an increase in our ability to affect the world or be affected by the world. And he says, we experience sadness when we feel a diminution or a lessening of our ability to affect the world or be affected by the world, right? And so it's our ability to be both open to the world and to join together with other people in order to increase our ability to affect the world and change the world in our interests. That's what brings feelings of joy. And personally, I think that is basically the point of it all, to increase the amount of joy in the world, because we can collectively influence the direction the world is going in.
Thank you so much, Keir. What a note to end it on. Brilliant. Next, we have Polly Smythe. Polly will talk us through why trade union struggles matter and why they are so often underreported in mainstream media. Thanks, Polly.
Hi, everybody. Hello. Thanks so much for having me. And thank you, everyone who's joined the call, for giving me up your evening, especially when it is so hot. It's funny, when I was preparing to think about what I wanted to say this evening, I just could not produce a coherent thought. And then I was thinking, well, maybe that's something to do with the fact that my office does not have aircon and I am relying on this tiny, tiny fan. And then I was thinking about how that's such a perfect encapsulation of the reason that we're all on the call this evening, which is essentially drawing the connections between the climate crisis and how that intersects with workers and workplaces. So I'm going to talk tonight just a little bit about mainly the media, really. I'll talk a bit about my job and then how I think it is that the media has the role the media has played in making us all think that the fights over climate, the fights over work, the fights over rent, how the media has constructed them as separate fights, and how opportunities and gatherings like tonight's are so important in drawing out the connections between those different struggles. So I'm an industrial reporter at Novara Media. There are two of us in the country. It's me and a wonderful man who is called Alan, who's at Press Association, who covered the miners' strike back when it happened. So he's a little bit older than me. But it wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, there were lots of industrial reporters. And industrial reporters, for those of you who don't know, basically just cover work. They cover trade unions, they cover disputes, they cover they talk to shop stewards, and essentially, a bit like what Keir was saying, they make sense of why it is the way, why the way we work is the way we work, and why is it that workers feel certain ways about things. So once upon a time, there were loads of industrial reporters who were reporting on work. In the 1930s, the Labour and Industrial Correspondents Group, which was a big group of industrial reporters who were all male, were actually allocated their own room at the Ministry of Labour with telephones for their own use. Fast forward many, many years to the 1980s, and the Financial Times, which is hardly a friend to the workers, it was employing 6 industrial reporters. Now it is just me and Alan. Why is that? Well, a lot of it began after the miners' strike. There was this real sense that we'd reached a kind of final resolution in the conflict between Labour and capital, and that unions had suffered this great final defeat. Following the miners' strike as well, the country went through rapid deindustrialisation, and so once where we would have had reporting on industry, instead we got much more reporting on finance and the kinds of work that came after industry. And there was a real sense that these kinds of new work would never, ever be unionised. I was reading an interview recently from 2011 with Peter Hitchens, who said that because we're a nation who sell cappuccinos and mobile phones to each other, there is simply no need for industrial correspondence. Now, I don't want to overstate the importance of industrial correspondence. I don't think that if the Financial Times had retained those 6 reporters, the union movement would necessarily be thriving. But I do think it's really important to unpick what the decline of industrial reporting means for groups like Workers' Planet, and for all of us. Often, the thing that people say to me about the decline of industrial reporting is, oh, we just have bad coverage now. That is true. There is a lot of really terrible coverage. You only have to think back to the strike wave and Mick Lynch's interactions with Kay Burley to remember quite how impoverished our media is. That's true. Another thing I think is that work has been really depoliticized through the lack of coverage. We don't necessarily think of work as a place where we want to struggle. I find it really funny to think back only a few years ago for myself when I was working in an appalling minimum wage job, where my boss was essentially Scrooge. She came in on Christmas Eve and told me to stop having fun. And this was all during the Corbyn years where I was phone banking and leafleting, and I never once thought about joining a union. But the really crucial issue, I think, about the decline of industrial reporters is about what gets determined as an industrial issue. And this is where I think the climate comes in. Let's take AI. AI is an issue that intersects with the labour and the climate movement incredibly well. On the labour side, AI relies on outsourced and exploited labour, mainly in the global south, in order to function. AI also is de-skilling and getting rid of jobs all over the world. I know, Ali, you're from Equity. I know that voice workers, are particularly at risk at the moment. AI also is ushering in a golden era for natural gas because of its vast energy requirements, and from Ireland to Mexico is creating massive droughts. But without someone to make that framing explicit, it is all too easy to miss the way in which these two movements intersect. Why do I think that that is a problem? Well, one, I think that it's harder to make connections internationally when you don't have reporters and media that are able to pull up these connections. You aren't able to link, maybe let's say, voice actors in Equity losing their jobs in the UK to struggles by outsourced workers in Kenya against, these massive AI companies. So we stay quite parochial. Two, it's difficult even within the UK to build these, kind of connective tissues that allow us to start organising together. But most importantly, I think it means that it's much easier for antagonistic framings to be adopted, whether that's by the right-wing media, who are able to stoke, arguments of just a world versus the workers, whether that's politicians, I always go back to the Trump quote of, you can either be loyal to American Labour or loyal to the environmental lunatics. You can't be loyal to both. But also, crucially, to unions themselves. Gary Smythe himself, the GMB General Secretary, called net zero fundamentally a quite middle class environmental debate. So increasingly, people are making these connections themselves. I'm not saying that they need the media, to do it for them. I'm just saying that it can be helpful when you have a media that's able to reflect those discussions. And and we saw it with Enough is Enough. I was at so many Enough is Enough events where someone would say, I went on strike, got a 2.5 pay rise after being out for a couple of weeks, and then my rent went up 7%. What was the point? So people are drawing out these connections, but I think that then the challenge is, where do you go next? When you've noticed that your rent rise is eating up your pay increase, what do you do about it? And I think sometimes the left can be a bit glib and say, organise. But organise with who and organise to do what? And those aren't easy questions. Those are questions that are difficult and need to be thrashed out. And so that's why I think the launch of Workers Planet is so exciting, because it's the perfect kind of venue to thrash out those actually quite difficult discussions among comrades. So yeah, great. It's really a pleasure to be here. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Polly, for bringing all of those intersecting issues together for us. Um, Up next, we have Tom Nicholas. Tom will explore the importance of generational politics and how innovative political education can connect across age and class divides. Thank you so much, Tom.
Hi, thank you, Ali, and thank you, everyone who's. I'm gonna kind of jump on a couple of things that both Keir and Polly have already offered, and kind of try and build on that wonderfully. When as Ali was just saying, that the thing that I was kind of asked to talk about this evening was about kind of innovative communication, innovative education methods. As a result of the fact that, for those of you that don't know me, I depending on how fancy I'm feeling each day, I either sort of do video journalism or I make silly videos for the internet. Um, and it's always interesting to hear doing that kind of work. So what that looks like in practice for me most of the time is making videos for YouTube, but to hear that described as innovative, because in many ways it feels like that should have become one of our sort of normal means of doing political education by now, whether that's in kind of very much big E education kind of efforts, whether that's political parties or political groups kind of doing their communication. It feels like about every 5 years or so, there's like a big moment where it feels like, oh, the internet's going to really change politics. You know, whether that's the election of Donald Trump, or his second election last year. You know, he went on a bunch of podcasts, and the sort of narrative from that was, oh, this internet thing is going to really change politics. But then you go back 5 years, and well, I guess Trump being elected the first time, but also Brexit happened, and the sort of role of whether it's Cambridge Analytica or just Facebook more broadly in that was kind of all this internet thing is going to really change politics, all the way back to David Cameron doing his like vlogs. I don't know if anyone remembers Web Cameron. That being like, oh, all politicians are going to be doing this in 10 years time, in 20 years time. However, generally speaking, kind of that online media space has sort of been underserved, I guess, in at least as I see it, despite there being quite a large audience out there that is kind of very much seeking to unpick not only the, I mean, Keir very, very ably kind of summed up these crises, and which are the big crises leading to the smaller kind of barnacle crises growing on top of the big ones. But I think there's also kind of like this broad sense of crisis that, whether you can name these things in very kind of erudite ways, you kind of feel that sense that something in the world right now isn't up. Whether that's because I've just had to balance a cardboard box up to stop the sun getting me, because I also am too hot, and unlike Polly, wasn't organized enough to have a fan here. Whether that's because your housing situation feels really unstable and expensive, whether that's because your workplace feels exploitative or unstable or precarious, in whatever context that is, that feeling is leading people to want to unpick that, right? I'm sure there are people out there who are just, you know, nose back to the grindstone, head down, let's muddle through the best we can with these crises. But actually, there is a huge demand to engage at a reasonably high intellectual level with what is that feeling of crisis downstream from. Sometimes, clever segue with downstream, I guess. Sometimes, in the best possible world, that is through engaging with stuff like Polly's reporting and her colleagues at Novara. Sometimes that is going to slightly more questionable sources, right? The the sort of podcasts that ushered Donald Trump in, or that might be carrying a lot of reform voices here in the UK. And that's not just young people that are looking for those explanations either. I know when I look at the audience for my work, when I kind of talk to people about it, the assumption was always that people who are engaging with sort of I guess it is political education of some description online. The assumption is always that it's, everyone's 16, but actually what we do is we see that actually it's young people is that are engaging with this stuff are actually much older than you imagine. Actually, there's kind of like quite a mainstream kind of cross-generational audience, and there is a huge amount of space to do more of that work online. However, I also want to talk to the importance of doing things in physical spaces, which is something that both Polly and Keir talked about a lot as well, because I think there is always that one thing of listening to a fantastic podcast that explains something in a fantastic way, watching the right video or the right report that really unpicks something for you and unlocks what the kind of like actual formations and processes at the heart of that kind of sense of unease, that sense of crisis are. But one of the big challenges is always, well, what do you do with that energy? What do you go out and do? How do I find people in physical space that can act on those things with me, or at the very least sympathize, I guess. And so I think events like this are really important for kind of bringing that education into a kind of action as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom. I definitely had that experience myself, which was what led me to the union. Okay, so just one quick thing before we head into our first breakout. Thank you, everyone, to all our first speakers. It was just really great to hear a bit about what you've all got to say. It gives us a really good taste for Workers' Planet and sets the stage really well. But yeah, before we head out to this breakout, we've had a huge demand for workshops and sessions, and we want to make sure we can include as many of them as possible. And so we've launched a crowdfunder to help us book additional venue space in Brighton so that we can expand the programme. Please consider donating and sharing, and the link, I think, will be in the chat now. There it is. So yes, now it is over to you guys. We are going to break you out into breakout rooms, and we'd love you to reflect on the following questions together. Where are you based? Are you in a union? And what are the barriers for someone like you to advocate for climate justice in your union? Welcome back, everybody. While you're coming back from your breakouts, we want to quickly mention that we're encouraging union branches to officially support Workers' Planet by passing a model motion to become an event partner. So we'll drop a link to the model motion template in the chat. Feel free to take this model motion to your branch, region, and help build union support for the event. We really appreciate that. Also, we have the WhatsApp chat. It might have been mentioned, but yes, you can stay updated there about the event, and the link should either already be in the chat or we'll put it again now. Okay. So now we can jump back in with our next set of speakers, all of whom are part of organising efforts connecting climate justice with working class power. So first up, we have Toby, who is the local organiser for ACORN Brighton, who will speak on how they're organising young people by focusing on material needs like housing and rent. Thank you, Toby.
Hey everyone, thanks for inviting me to speak at this event, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes from Workers' Power, from Workers' Planet even. So ACORN, for those of you who haven't heard it, is a community union. So we are a union mobilising lower and middle income people to take direct action on issues that are affecting people. So a lot of that is around the housing crisis. So if you have heard of ACORN, it's probably in relation to taking action around housing. So eviction resistances, getting repairs done, but also taking part in larger campaigns against things like no fault eviction and things like that, and building more council houses, a lot of those kind of things. Why I'm here today specifically is to talk about mobilizing and organizing, and how do we get people active, because it's a big challenge, right? ACORN has got thousands and thousands of members all across the country, but at any one time, only a few people of those, only a small percentage of those people are actually like active. And it's the same. There, in any branch we have, there are also tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of people who aren't members. So how do we mobilize those people? How do we activate them? And how do we get them taking action on issues like, the climate crisis? ACORN's model is to start small, right? It's to start where people, on issues that people care about in their day-to-day lives. A big part of ACORN's model is knocking on doors, going out and knocking on doors to talk to people about what issues are affecting their community. It's such a, I cannot overestimate how big a thing this is, knocking on doors. It's not, it's not something that's particularly fun or exciting, or something you can put on a cool Instagram graphic, but knocking on doors is the main thing that has got ACORN to where it is now, an organization with thousands and thousands of members. And we just ask people what issues are affecting them in their community, and that is the beginning of getting people to take action, right? I don't know about you guys, but I've been involved in the left for a long time, and there has been undoubtedly a attitude of, we know what issues are, because quite often we do, right? We know what the issues are that people care about, but quite often that's not true. Going out into the community and finding out what issues are affecting people in their lives has allowed ACORN to take action on those issues, mobilize people, and then talk to them and train them on the bigger issues. An example of that is going from talking about housing on an individual basis, like our branch chair, Kezia, who joined because she was being evicted. She was a single mum and she was being evicted, and now she's the chair of the branch, and she's part of the taking action on a national level as part of our retrofitting campaign, which we're working with several other organisations on. It's a climate justice campaign, because it's about retrofitting our incredibly inefficient housing. It's basically Insulate Britain, but by another mean. It's the same thing. It's about getting our houses insulated, because there are 15 million renters in this country, and the vast majority of rented houses, mine certainly isn't, are not energy efficient. So we're wasting huge amounts of energy heating the house. So that's an example of how you start by taking an issue that affects someone, whether that is an eviction that they're experiencing, whether that is the rubbish not being collected on the street, whether that is potholes, and a lot of it is potholes, whether that is, they generally just don't like the council. Taking that anger, having those conversations with people, validating them, like, yes, you're right to feel angry. The world is crap, but we can do something about it. And I think this is perhaps something that a lot of bigger trade unions, and I'm a member of Unite myself, and a rep for Unite. This is something that a lot of bigger trade unions perhaps have been missing, is that face-to-face individual contact and those face-to-face relationships that build up power and build up, the trust in the organization and trust in each other, so that we can actually take action. And this is something that we've been working on in ACORN, and this is something that does work, and we have seen it work in enormous campaigns. We have won the end to Section 21 evictions. That's enormous. We're now, like I said, working with several other organisations on this retrofitting campaign, and you know what? We're going to win that too. So these are huge steps in the right direction that are happening. An organisation 100th the size of, say, Unite, with 0.001% of the money. Retrofit for the future. It's just been pasted in the chat. Yeah, so that's the campaign that ACORN is part of. We're looking at other campaigns about how we can link people's immediate concerns to the climate crisis, because that is often like a huge issue, right? Like, how do you make it immediate to someone if you're knocking on their door and you want to mobilize them for the climate movement? How do you do that? What is immediate to them? And one of the things we're looking at across the country at the moment is around flooding and flood risk areas. So much of our country, so many of our coastal towns and riverside towns are in areas of massive flood risk, coastal erosion, it's going to get worse as the climate crisis gets worse. And there is basically no plan for that. The government has no plan. The current flood safety grants, your community has to apply for them, and you can only apply on the basis of potential economic damage if your community floods. So basically, the government looks at it and says, we will only build flood damage if a flood here would cost this much money. They take no account of social damage or potential loss of life or anything like that. It's only money. So that's something we're looking at campaigning on. And that's one of the ways we have found to link people's immediate concerns to things like climate change, community resilience, and how we can build a movement that will actually change things. It's not the only answer. We do not have all the answers, but we're working on it. So yeah, in conclusion, that's my kind of two big things. It's you've got to build in-person relationships with people, linking things they care about to what's happening in the world at large. And you do that by knocking on doors. There's no quick trick. There's no one easy way that landlords hate to build power. It all comes from knocking on doors. So that would be my advice, would be get out into your community, get out knocking on doors, find out what people want to change and build a campaign around that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Toby. So great to hear about all the organising you guys are doing at ACORN, and really brilliant to bring in the climate adaptation aspect as well into the conversation. So thank you. Next up, we have Stu, the campaigns coordinator at Fuel Poverty Action. He will show us how the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis are two sides of the same coin. Thank you, Stu.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I don't know how much I can add to everything that's already been said, but it's been really heartening to talk tonight. I think it can be difficult, especially for younger people like myself, to recognise the level of progress and change that is being achieved while, as speakers have covered, conditions around us seem to deteriorate. Workers' power seems to become smaller and more individualised. But I'm coming from an organisation that was founded nearly 15 years ago by working class people, mostly pensioners and disabled people, who were participating in the climate movement, but asking, why is no one connecting this issue with my lived reality? The fact that even though energy producers are burning enough fuel to alter the fabric of the planet, I'm getting cut off while I try to heat my food. The UK is the second largest oil producer in Europe, I think, but we've got people dying in freezing cold homes every winter, at highest electricity prices in the continent, as I think Megan touched on, and the leakiest housing stock in the continent as well. And Fuel Poverty Action was virtually alone in making these connections a decade ago, but now people across every movement, climate, housing, energy, pensioners groups, disabled people, all making these connections across all localities, UK-wide, and within organisations, catching up to the fact that the climate crisis is clearly not just an issue for the future, but it's also not purely an ecological issue. It's a political issue. And as usual, it's working class people bearing the brunt of it, be it through extreme heat, extreme cold, flooding, rising prices, crumbling infrastructure. So FPA's mission has always remained about climate justice, which to us means warm homes, low bills, and clean air for every one of us. And the solution that we've put forward that's caught a bit of the public imagination is called Energy for All. This is a demand for every household to be guaranteed enough energy to ensure its needs are covered free of charge. That's adequate heating, lighting, cooking, washing, for those that need it as well, access to medical and mobility aids. And the way the system is set up now is actually to guarantee profits for the energy industry. That might not seem surprising, but I'm not just talking figuratively. We literally pay standing charges that cover the costs of these energy companies before our money buys any energy at all. And that price cap that every few months changes usually goes up. This time it's going down, but it'll go up again in time for winter, I'm sure. That's set every few months, and it factors in what they call headroom. This is a minimum level of profit for the energy companies, and that's factored into what we are charged per unit of electricity or gas that we buy. And no surprise, suppliers have made £500 billion of our money over the past 4 winters, while we've seen, record numbers of people being cut off from their supply, fallen into debt, or had to neglect other essential needs, of course, like heating, like being made homeless, and water going up. So we want to see that system turned on its head, where our needs being covered is prioritised at the expense of these profits. Beyond that, we'll pay a bit maybe for using more than we need, and people heating mansions or swimming pools, they can pay significantly more. That's also going to make the government and energy industry retrofit and insulate our homes. If the burden is on them to meet everyone's needs and deliver a certain amount of energy that covers your needs, then they want to make your home energy efficient. Up until now, it's not been in their interest. They want us burning as much gas as possible because that makes them money. So if you turn this on its head, we're incentivizing that drive towards energy efficiency and well-insulated homes. There's no issue in meeting everyone's basic energy needs and doing it without expense to the planet as well. We know that electricity being produced by the wind and sun is way cheaper than what we get from gas. But at the minute, those savings aren't being passed on to us. We're always charged at the higher rate of gas, and that needs to be immediately changed. That's what's leaving us open to, the likes of reform at the minute, spreading all this disinformation that renewables are the issue. And we need to get past that as a movement that, that's disinformation and renewables are cheaper, but why aren't we benefiting from that already? And there's some, fairly complicated things that not everyone understands and how that needs to be addressed, but they could be addressed very simply by those that are making policy. Give another example that people might not be aware of. A scandal that there is a bit of growing attention to is that we are paying billions of pounds through our energy bills for wind and solar farms to switch off and stop generating when there's, deemed to be too much being produced, more than they think that we can use. So this is clean electricity worth basically nothing that could be going to households for free to do our washing, charge devices, do, the cooking for a week, or heat up old storage heaters, hot water tanks, this sort of thing, for dirt cheap, without expense to the planet either. So, while millions of people are being cut off, the amount of this ultra cheap and clean energy being wasted could give every UK home 10% of its electricity for free, or instead power 3 million homes entirely for free year round. So that's the scale of this scandal, and it quite simply needs to be addressed, and we need to all be benefiting from our fair share of the wind and sun. So the battle for clean and cheap or even free energy to meet all of our needs are one and the same. That's the battle that FPA is leading. So please affiliate your trade union or become a member yourself. We're not a mass membership organisation like some of the trade unions that we're all part of. We're a small grassroots group that's been punching above our weight. So every single member that joins us, your impact is felt. If you're looking for that group where you can join and make a really valuable contribution, then let's talk. And yeah, I think that's all from me. Thanks everyone for being part of this. Thanks to the organisers, and let's win back the workers' planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much to such incredible work you guys are doing over there at Fuel Poverty Action. And yeah, I didn't know a lot of that, and it's kind of blown my mind. So yes, finally, hopefully we still have Miranda, here she is, from Heat Strike, who will close this round. I think it's been mentioned in the chat a bit. And she'll be highlighting how collective climate action can I can't speak anymore. Collective climate action can win real change.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks, Ali, for introducing me. I'm from Heat Strike. I will tell you a bit about our campaign. I'm going to be quite quick, so hopefully it all makes sense, because normally I take a bit longer and have a slideshow to go through, but I'm going to sort of abbreviate it a bit. So we're a campaign that was started by organisers in the climate and worker movement, and we're organising around the issue of heat and heat in the workplace. Our campaign started from an observation that people are really ready to take action on climate when they can feel the climate crisis has arrived. So some of us were part of XR, and we noticed that, like, ordinarily on those open calls in the sort of early days, there would be a steady trickle of people, but when there was when an extreme heat hit in the summer, and especially in that summer of 2022 with the 40-degree day, suddenly the open calls would be jammed full of people. And there's something about heat that's different from flooding, because it's sort of experienced more collectively. Like when there's flooding, it tends to affect a small minority of people. Like heat obviously isn't spread evenly around the country, but it does tend to affect sort of a lot of people all at once, and suddenly they're ready to step up. The climate crisis no longer feels like something over there, it's kind of physically affecting them. And from that observation, we got to the fact there's no maximum working temperature in this country, and we started organising with the Bakers Union and the TUC and their Cool It campaign, calling for a maximum working temperature and a furlough scheme for anyone who can't work because it's too hot and it's unsafe to do so. So it's sort of viewing the climate crisis as a health and safety issue. And then our third demand is for a plan to tackle the climate crisis, because we know it's not enough just to kind of adapt to this crisis. We need to be mitigating it as well, and the government is not doing enough. So those are our demands. And which brings me to what Heat Strike is actually doing. So like the TUC and the Cool It campaign and from the Bakers has been around for a while. But we're sort of trying to really organise around it and bring momentum and bring a lot of attention to it, using heat to do so. So we have like two strands to this. Like we've been going around talking to trade unionists, going to different conferences, talking to climate activists, building support for our campaign. And we're getting people ready to do like a rapid response. So when we get extreme temperatures in this country, and it's sort of heading that way right now, we will call the heat strike. And going on heat strike could mean many things. It could mean going slow at work, because you could mean turning up to work and just kind of doing the minimum. It could mean holding a banner outside your work that says heat strike at lunchtime with your colleagues. It could mean doing some workplace organising and bargaining around adaptations for heat. It could mean putting our health and safety posters up and our Section 44 posters, which inform workers of their rights around heat. And it could mean using Section 44 rights to actually walk out of work if there is a clear and imminent danger by being at work because it's so hot. And we're running Section 44 training on this because it is a little bit complicated, and there are steps you need to take if you're going to do it legally to protect yourself. And we also have a sort of opt-in for kind of climate groups or people who might be retired or not working to sort of set up cool stations, do some mutual aid. It really kind of, inspired by fuel poverty actions like warm-ups and warm hubs. This is more like a kind of cool station where you might hand out lollies and ice and water and sun cream and do some outreach and talk to people about heat. One of the things that's been really interesting actually when we've done these cool stations ourselves is just like the conversations you have are so different than normal climate outreach. Like normally people I would say are often quite sympathetic and agree that, the climate crisis is, burning issue of our times, but generally it sort of makes them feel a bit guilty. It feels a bit over there. They kind of not really, kind of want to get away and sort of stop thinking about it. But when you go to people and start saying, what's it like in your workplace when it gets really hot? Suddenly this is something that people have a personal experience of, and, they're interested, and it speaks to where they are. And also it's like, often a more kind of blue collar jobs that experience heat in the workplace at the most extreme, because they're often on the front lines, so working in person, not in air conditioned offices. So it's like a different sort of person than might speak to, sort of XRs, normal, for example, sort of climate outreach they might do, or a different climate group. And so that's our rapid response. We had this plan for a little while, and the last 2 summers we didn't actually get extreme heat. So this year we're doing something a bit different. We're also planning Heat Week, which is from the 14th to the 20th of July. That's the average hottest week in the UK. So that's like a pre-planned week of action around heat in the workplace. And we're inviting people to just start talking to employers about heat, maybe doing cool stations if you're not in work. There's a whole kind of flat pack of activities in this, different things you can get involved with in different days. If you want to find out more about our campaign, I think John's going to send some links, but you can also sign up via our website. You just type in Heatstrike UK, heatstrike.uk, and then you can sign up, and we'll email you information about, with all our resources. We have Section 44 resources. We're going to run trainings, how to get involved in Heat Week, how to get involved in the rapid response, and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, that was a real nutshell of our campaign. Hopefully I didn't rush through it all too quickly. But I will put our email address as well in the chat in case anyone is interested and wants to follow up with any questions or anything outside of this.
Great. Thank you so much, Miranda. It just really showcases how many different ways, climate justice is intersecting with workers' issues. Right, so now we are going to enter our second breakout session, so you can reflect on everything that you've heard in small groups. So we're coming to the end of our evening. Thank you so much once again to all our speakers, and to every single one of you who showed up this evening. Thank you for joining and contributing your energy tonight on this warm evening. We hope you'll carry this energy forward to Workers' Planet on Sunday, September the 7th in Brighton, for a full day of panels, workshops, art, culture and organising, running alongside TUC Congress. So this will be a space for anyone who wants to build power on the shop floor and in the streets. So we have a few action points for you. We may have said them already, but please sign up to the volunteer for the event using the Google form we've shared. Get your union branch involved via the model motion, and support the crowdfunder to help us expand the event. We need as many people there as possible. And finally, share tonight's event on social media using #WorkersPlanet. And that's everything. So thank you once again. Solidarity. And see you all in Brighton. Take care, everyone. Enjoy your evenings.